Thank you, and good afternoon to everybody. I already saw lots of people waving at Kimon and Sophia, so I know they have a fan club that's here. It has been such a joy to read their books, and I listen to them on Audible as well. How many of you are Audible people? That's how I get things done. The writing is so gorgeous. They're also, even in the pain, the writing is gorgeous. And maybe I shouldn't say even in the pain, but it makes the lives come alive. And I just am so grateful to be here with both of you. It just, when I'm almost finished with the book, I'm sending it to my editor next week, and I'm like, oh God, maybe I need to rewrite this thing. because the poetry, I mean, they're both poets, and so it just really, it really comes through. So grateful that you all are here. Welcome to Washington, D.C. I know you are now here in Washington, D.C. So, you know, as you do when you are planning a panel, you have a little prep. And I got a chance to meet them on Zoom a week or so ago. And our conversation ranged to, you know, craft and your writing and what are you working on next. But so much of what we talked about and so much of what their books are about is their mothers. And James McBride this morning talked about his mother, the power of women. Anybody who was watching the Democratic National Convention this week knows that mothers were very much a theme. So I'd like to start with that conversation. And Sophia, I know that your mother played a really great role in all aspects of what you're talking about, but she's the one who introduced you to poetry.
Yes, she did. And, you know, I always say I owe so much to her because she was a lover of poetry and a lover of literature and a lover of books before I was born. And she imparted that love to me and my siblings. I mean, she created her own educational curriculum for me and my siblings, which then she eventually, you know, shared with other children in Montego Bay. But, and she was the person who handed me my first book of poems and said, you know, I think you will like this. I think you need this. Like, there was something in me she saw that poetry would nurture. And so I always say I wouldn't be here without my mother. In fact, just before I got on the stage, she texted me and was like, hi, love. I hope you have a good event today. So, yes.
So, and your mother, I mean, Shakespeare, both of your mothers thought that Shakespeare was important. Mm-hmm. And what role did your mother play in your interest in literature and writing?
When I was in third grade, my mother entered me into a poetry reciting competition and made me memorize Langston Hughes. And my mom is very competitive person. So this was her way of introducing me to something that she loved so much. And though I am not as competitive, that moment was an opportunity for me to really sit with the power and the resonance of what a poem can do, even as I was so young. And it taught me so much about not just how to walk through the world, but how to really consider the power of language, even before I understood what a poem could do. So I'm really grateful to her for that. Mm-hmm.
So, and it is that power of language. I mean, both of you use language both to tell amazing stories, but also in some ways as a way of healing. And so how did the process of writing this memoir, how was it salvation in some ways? Or was it?
You know, for me, I didn't know what to expect when I entered into the process of writing the memoir. You know, I kind of had a broad idea of, okay, the moments of my life I wanted to include and an idea of what the overarching arc or narrative of the book would be. But while I was writing it, there were things that surprised me that I guess I would call, you know, in some ways healing, particularly having to write about my parents in a deeper and more nuanced way than I had before, especially my father. So writing about him I wanted to sort of go back, because my connection to Rastafari is through my father. So there's no story of my upbringing in Rastafari without his story. And so I had to go back and tell the story of his youth and how he came to Rastafari. And it was not something I knew before I began writing the book. I'd never asked him and he'd never shared it with me, you know? The rules of Rasta just kind of came as decrees from him. I never examined it as closely as I had to for the book. And so I had to do a lot of conversations with him. I called him on the phone, I recorded our interviews, and in many ways that humanized him to me in a way that surprised me. And so for me, in this very oblique way, like writing the book, I think changed the shape of my relationship with him.
So, you know, I think that that many Americans have kind of a romanticized view of what Rastafarianism is, and they see they see locks, they think spliffs, you know, they see Bob Marley, but you really tell a personal story about being part of a family, a very strict family. So before we come back to you, Kimon, for people who may not have read the book, because I'm sure almost everybody in here hasn't, and if not, you're going to be at the book signing and buying the book. Can you give us just a little bit of the story?
Sure. You know, that's part of the reason I wanted to write this memoir is because I came to the US for school, and some of the questions I was asked, or some of the things people said to me about Jamaica, I thought, oh wow, these American people need some education. You know, kind of everything you can imagine. You know, do you live in a hammock? Are you related to Bob Marley? Can you get a tan? Things like that. And so I was like, okay, I think...
How Stella got her groove back.
Oh my goodness. And you know, I thought, wow, Rastafari holds such a big space in the global imagination, but I think no one really knows when it comes down to it what Rastafari is about. Most people don't know that the Rastafari in Jamaica are a persecuted minority historically, that Rastas make up 1% or less of the Jamaican population, that we had a prime minister in Jamaica that said, shoot all Rastas on sight, that they were the outcasts of Jamaica, right? That they were kicked out of their homes, they were forbidden from having jobs, they were turned away from their families, they were even forbidden from walking along the beach sides that were being developed for tourists. And so for me, writing the book, I wanted to expand this narrow view that people have of Rastafari and deepen the idea and deepen the knowledge that people have of how Rastafari history intersects with Jamaican culture. And then I also wanted to write more specifically about Rasta womanhood and girlhood. Because as you say, when most people think of Rastafari, they have in their minds, I think, the idea of a man, and one man in particular, which, you know, you just named him. I think most people wouldn't think of Rastafari and think of the women or think of the girls, which is how I grew up. And so I wanted to write this book to give a portrait of Jamaican girlhood and of a young Rasta girl's life, what her life is like, what her dreams and desires are like. And so for me, that was like one of the driving forces of writing the book.
Right, and it's a coming of age book. I mean, it really is one of those books that people need to read. And yours is also a coming of age book. Like the title, Dyscalculia, refers to a childhood experience. And then you go through, you know, your relationships and your relationship with your mother, your relationship with ex. So how were you, what was the journey for you in terms of healing and processing the difficult moments?
I try not to write for catharsis. When I approach the page with the understanding, I also try not to think about an audience too much, but when you approach the page, you at least assume that someone might approach it. And so it's really important to me that I'm not re-traumatizing my readers or asking them to do a kind of emotional labor that I haven't justified. So I tend to come to the writing pretty self-assured, like quite sure about what I want to say and why. But what was really surprising to me, I think similarly in writing, even though I thought I had moved away from the need for catharsis, the way the story around my mother and our relationship developed, I was able to see some things about our relationship that I hadn't seen before, and similarly was able to humanize her. And more than anything, I wanted to give an example of what it looks like for a young Black woman to be struggling with mental illness, and then what that looks like in the family unit, and how that experience can differ from the experiences that we hear non-POC or non-Black people have with mental illness. And I also wanted to be able to center Blackness in the way that we think about mental illness, because often the idea of the Black story doesn't include things that we associate with whiteness, and unfortunately, many of us associate mental illness, or at least the opportunity to heal from mental illness, with whiteness. So catharsis was not necessarily something I needed, but it was something that I received, and gratefully so, just through the process of trying to understand not just what I was saying, but who I was speaking to, and what kind of relationship I wanted them to have with the text and with me once they stepped away. Yeah.
So we'll talk about craft, but because you have to write and rewrite and all of those things. But I am wondering, what was the process? Did you get stuck at a point where there was something you wanted to express and couldn't? How did you work your way through that? Because these are really deeply personal reflections.
Mm-hmm. I started writing sections of the book quite soon after the ensuing event happened, or at least the event that the book is based around. And in those moments, I was really emotional, and maybe those were written 5-6 years before the manuscript was even put together. So going back to what we talked about not wanting to write from catharsis, I tried to take some distance from it. So kind of like got it all out, spit it all out, took some time away from it, and then reapproached it with more of an editorial eye, with having more of a conversation with myself about not just what I wanted it to look like, but what experience I wanted for the reader. And ultimately, in the process of writing the book, I realized that, one, it's really hard. It's extremely difficult to write a book. But also that the book requires so much of you, both intellectually and in some ways spiritually. Like, you have to be willing to give yourself to the process of writing, while at the same time attempting to be rigorous and thoughtful, and trying to live up to the standard of what you've learned and who you admire, right? So it was difficult, but also very beautiful to be able to invest in craft in that way.
And Sophia, you started, I won't say it's a false start, but you had the idea of a memoir at one point, and then you didn't. Your professor, I think, said maybe it's time to wait. What was that process, and how did you get back to it?
Yeah, you know, I first started thinking about writing a memoir more than 10 years ago. And I was at that time, I just left home in a way that felt final. I felt whenever I returned home, it would be different. And I was at UVA, and I was studying poetry at my MFA, and I had a professor there. His name's Gregory Orr, who's a fantastic, fabulous poet who also wrote a memoir. And I told him I had this idea, and I tried to write it, but it really was too fresh. Some of the things that had happened towards the end of the book had just happened. And it felt too hard. It didn't feel like I could write the book without destroying some of myself. And I didn't want to write the book that way. It also felt like I would be writing the book from a wound, right? From hurt and from anger. And I didn't want to write the book that way either. And so similarly to what you said, Kimon, I needed distance. But my professor said to me, you know, I think you need to write this book from a place of safety. And I don't think you have that yet. And he was so right. I think it's the best advice anyone ever gave me. You know, because at that point I'd already had an agent and she was interested in the book, and it could have been easy to just be like, well, just write the book. But no, I didn't have that place of safety, and I needed that distance away. I needed to live a little bit more life to even know where the book was going to end.
Yeah, you know, because I think we've all read books that were really the rant. That somebody was just getting something off their chest and that they hadn't processed it. So thank you for waiting. Both of you teach other writers. And so I'm just curious what you, are some students here? Raise your hands. Oh, the teachers. Oh, well, teachers are our heroes. Librarians are our heroes. But what is it that you say to a student in the same way that your professor gave you advice, how to approach things? Is there something that you tell them to read at the beginning of the semester? What are the sort of bullet point tips that you give to them?
Why you look at me?
Buying myself some time.
Like, are you not really a good writer, but you think you are, or you're really good? Or...
I would never say that.
I know you wouldn't.
No.
Okay, so usually at the beginning of every class I teach, I have my students read June Jordan's Poem About My Rights.
Yep.
Because for me, I always feel like, okay, this is a good entry. This is a good poem to read as an entrance into some of the things I want my students to think about when we're writing poetry, right? So for me, it's not just, okay, we're gonna write some poems, but what do you want your poems to do in the world? And how do you move through the world? And how do you see or experience the world? And how are we gonna put that on the page? So I really try to push them to think not just about the poem as it exists on the page, but also the poem enacted in the world.
Yeah.
So I start there, and then we get to the sort of the foundationals and, you know, everything to do with prosody, but that's usually how I begin every first class.
Well, and you had some amazing mentors. The old poet,
Was
Derek
he an
Walker.
amazing mentor?
Well, he was not, but it was an experience. Let us say that for those who
It
not.
was an experience.
But you had a person who critiqued your work, and then Walcott, and then others who, you know, and Rita Dove, and
Yes.
So you had some amazing people who critiqued your work early, who helped give you direction. And of course, then you have your own voice. So I'm guessing you're playing that role in some ways.
You know, usually my teachers are like, I'm gonna get out your way, just do what you're doing. So there's that too in being a professor. When you see a student who is super talented, I'm just like, well, how can I best help this student? Because their poems need to live in the world.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's all different ways to approach.
Funny enough, I actually, for my undergraduate students, I also start with Poem for My Rights.
You do?
Yes.
There you go.
Yeah, and I also start with one of the lines in the poem is "Wrong is not my name," and I start with them with a prompt asking them to define their name and thus to define themselves. And it's always so beautiful seeing, first of all, not just the rigor of the poem, but also the musicality of the poem, the rhythmic quality of the poem, right? A lot of my students, especially in my graduate courses, come to us with not a lot of reverence for musicality, you know, like reading through line breaks and things like that. And it's really special to have them sit down in front of a poet who I know they care about and remind them, like, poetry is meant to be embodied, right? Your voice has to embody it. Your approach has to embody that musicality. So it's always beautiful to start there. And then with my grad students, often I try to ask them to come to class with a list of questions, things that they want to investigate for themselves, and questions that are not super specific, questions that are in some ways cerebral and allow for freedom, right? Freedom to think really, again, rigorously and critically about what kind of conversation they want to be having with themselves. And I also remind them that we're learning together, right? I try to be honest about the fact that, like, we are working writers. And so when I come to them and we're having these conversations, I'm coming away with it and bringing back that work to invest in my own work. And I think they seem to enjoy that reminder that in some ways we're peers, and also that I'm there to help guide them. And I think all the time about mentors I had, those who I think failed me and those who were amazing. I similarly had a professor tell me that time was not waiting for me and that I must wait for it. Ooh, she dragged me. And that stopped me from writing a memoir at 21, which would have been insane.
Not 21.
21, ridiculous. So I try to remember those moments and try to generously give those back to my students, not in a way to discourage them, but to say time is available for you as long as you remain available to it.
Right, and you as a writer will always be a writer and will keep writing. So I have a couple more
Also-
questions, but I'm sorry.
Something I have my students do is every class I teach, you have to memorize and recite a poem. So I'm like, we need to keep this tradition, right? This is also what my mother would do with me and my siblings. And you said your mom would do it too. You had to really hold the poem within you.
Yeah.
And there is something you learn about poetry making by holding the poem within you. So I have my students do this every semester. And you know, you never see a student so timid and tremulous as when they need to stand up and recite a poem. And I'm like, see, that what you're feeling? You need to bring that to the page, to the poem every time.
Yeah.
All right, I want to take the class.
Me too.
So I have many, many more questions, but I think we want to hear from them. You've both chosen an excerpt from the book. Do you want to go first?
Sure. What you need to know. A big part of this book is about a relationship I had that failed, and I use that language intentionally because of the metaphor and the relationship to mathematics that I'm trying to build. So I'll talk a little bit about, or I'll read from sections that talk
And
about
what's
that relationship.
dyscalculia?
Dyscalculia is a learning disorder that prevents the student from being able to do math calculations that they should be able to do at the time and age that they are. And it's something that I got diagnosed with at 16, which is a really long time to not know that you can't do math. Okay. The first time X kissed me, it felt like I'd been reborn into a world I'd been banished from, a tremulous heart being my means of excommunication, a full one willing me back. It's the way the stupefying glare of his ambient mood lights touched the tip of his nose, or how he looked at me in the almost darkness, like he was scoring every single emotion. It's the way my mask fell like a cloth released. It's like he knew there was something inside of me that was at the end. It's the way he immediately held my hand with not a single bead of trepidation, like he knew I was his, like he knew he had to walk beside me to get ahead of himself. It's the way he could have been afraid and was, but came for me, came to get me, would not let me ignore him, would not let me see past him. It's the way his generosity became his only currency, spending every dollar of it on my needs and needing so little in return. It's the way I knew that all I had to do was love him to deserve how much he loved me. It's the way the darkest parts of myself quivered as his love approached me, the seam of what separates me suddenly loose. I wasn't sure, but I had ambition. We were broke and working service jobs that paid us more than we'd ever made. We were young and pregnant with unfair dreams. One wanted to tour the world and shift the soundscape. The other wanted the same. At first, it seemed like sickle and sun, Leopold and Loeb, desires of different origins, complementary but one. We were fighting for the other's sense of significance, giving everything we could to the other's confidence. I loved his approach to sound making, and he loved to hear me sing. My mom told me that my grandma told her that we were cursed. She said that one of us in a past life had killed a priest or stolen from a god, and thus Our love lives would be marked with cruelty, abandon, and martyrdom. I can't imagine how we'd ever be important enough to justice's arc as to elicit such pointed karmic revenge. But what the fuck do I know? I found it a fantastic and self-indulgent lie, and I wasn't surprised that my mother believed it. It was good drama, but it wouldn't be mine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sophia.
Okay. I'm going to read a passage from the book that was one of the most defining moments of my life when I cut my hair, cut my dreadlocks. And for those who don't know, who think, okay, for the Rastafari, the dreadlocks are just a hairstyle. Like, for the Rastas, it's not. For the Rastafari, dreadlocks are kind of a divine marker of your reverence to Haile Selassie and your belief in Jah. And for me and my siblings, it was not a choice to wear our hair that way. It was kind of another thing that was decreed by my father. And there came a certain point in my life where I began to feel that the hair on my head belonged to him and not to me, that it was directly connected to this kind of loss of autonomy that I was feeling, that I wasn't myself. And for Black women anyway, hair holds sort of such a big place in our lives, and it carries so much tied to our feelings of identity, of beauty, of selfhood, of culture. And yeah, you know, being a teenager, I felt more and more that this was a thing that tethered me to my father and to his rules and to his definition of the woman he wanted me to be. And I wanted to define for myself the woman I wanted to be. And so when I said all this to my mother and I said, you know, Mom, I feel lost. And she said, how can I help you? And this is the scene. Mom told me to hold down my head, and I held down my head. She asked me if I was ready, and I said yes. Beside me, the sea breeze made womanly shapes in the lace of my curtain, and no one among us spoke. I don't know who held the scissors or who made the first cut. All I heard were the hinges of the shears locking and unlocking, the blades cutting. And then long black reeds of hair came loose in their quick hands. My dreadlocks fell around me like ruined limbs. I closed my eyes then because I could not look at what I was losing. I had railed for so long and had not expected it to matter when the moment came. But now I found that it mattered a great deal. My throat burned with peculiar remorse as all my dreadlocks fell away. For what was Medusa without her snakes? There was hair, so much hair. Dead hair, hair of my gone self, wisps of spiderweb hair, old uniform lint hair, pillow sponge and tangerine strings hair. A whole life pulled itself up by my hair, the hair that locked the year I broke my tooth, hair that locked the day we caught cane ashes in the yard, hair of the lean years, hair of the fat, pollen of marigolds hair, my mother's aloe vera hair, my sister's weaving wild ixoras in my hair, the pull of the tides at our sea village hair, grits of sand hair, hair of salt tears, hair thick with the blood of my own cut wrists. Hair of my binding, hair of my unbeautiful wanting, hair of his bitter words, hair of the cruel world, hair roping me to my father's belt, hair wrestling the taunts of bald heads in the street, hair of my lone self, hair wrapped atop the ghost woman in white's hair, red thread of hair, centuries of hair, galloping future of incorrigible hair, all cut away from me. When they were finished, my neck and head were so light they swung unsteady. The tethers had been cut from me, and I was new again. unburdened, someone different, I told myself. A girl who could choose what happened next.
So if you haven't already read these books, you need to you need to buy them, get them, but also reread them and listen to the Audible because both of them read their books and they're so incredible. So we're going to have some questions from the audience so people can start lining up at the 2 microphones that are here and here. And while we wait for them, one of the things we talked about in our prep call was when other people read your book, you never know how the audience is going to react, how the reader is going to react. And there are always surprises, and there are letters and emails that come. So I'm just curious, how do you can't, sometimes people want you to have the answers for them, or they think that your life is exactly like theirs. What's your response when you see something where someone has poured their heart out to you? You can't be necessarily the answer for them.
No, I can't be the answer for them, but I try my best to meet them where they're at. If they're seeing something common in our stories, then I feel grateful for that, But I have had people ask me advice for things, and I'm just like, I can't tell you, girl. I had someone ask me, like, hey, my partner is a Rasta man, and my son has dreadlocks, but he just asked me if he could cut his dreadlocks. So what do you think I should do? I was like, I'm not telling you what to do. I don't want this Rasta man to come for me. So there are some times where I'm like, I cannot answer this parenting question for you. Yeah.
In the next life. Come on.
Funny enough, I get a lot of people who want me to diagnose them, which is incredibly awkward because I have to remind them I am simply a writer. I could never, I unfortunately did not, to my mother's chagrin, become a doctor.
They both have West Indian mothers.
Correct. I tend to shy away from that, but I also, get feedback where people say this really validated me, or even that it helped them see their mothers differently, and that always feels very special. And I always hope to make room for the reader in the writing, so to see them actually be able to come into that space and flourish with the text feels really special.
Thank you both very much. All right, so we'll start. Am I picking the? Okay, right here.
Well, first.
And one of my friends always does this. Please ask a question, not make a dissertation. I say that respectfully.
So my question is for Ms. Sinclair. In dealing with such a deeply personal memoir that kind of intersects with other people's lives, how do you navigate the fine line of what is yours to share, and respecting the other people in your life and what is theirs to share?
Yeah, thank you. When I wrote the book, I spoke to all of my family members. I spoke to my siblings, spoke to my mom and my dad during the writing of the book. I would text my siblings particularly almost every day to kind of check my memories with theirs. Say, this is how I remember it. How do you remember it? Like, when did we live at this place? Or do you remember this person? Or, so for me, I wanted it to be a collective, a weaving of our memories and not just mine. And so that was important to me, actually, that their memories were included. My parents, there's a chapter in the beginning of the book that is just their youth and their meeting, and that was all interviews I did with them, and I wrote it almost exactly as they said it to me. I tried to keep my family involved in the process of the writing. For a lot of the Rasta vernacular, the way that the Rastas speak in the book, I knew how they say it, but it had never been written down. And so for a lot of it, I had to call my brother, call my father, and be like, how would you grammatically, I mean, I know Rasta don't deal with grammar, but if you had to write it down, how would you spell it? Or what is the grammatical, you know? So I really involved everybody as much as I could.
Great.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Black woman, poet, memoirist. When I think of those three things, the Queen Mother Maya Angelou comes to my mind.
Of course.
So I was wondering, what role does she play in your work? Second question to Ms. Sinclair, Maurice Condé, Edwidge Dundika, Earl Lovelace were Caribbean writers that made me fall in love with that genre of literature. And can you go ahead and tell me one Caribbean writer that inspires you? And to Ms. Felix, I'm currently working on a unit on Lucille Clifton for my students. So if there's one poem that you feel that needs to be part of that unit, I'll happily take that recommendation.
And they were all questions. Let us be clear.
I guess I'll start. I love all the Caribbean writers that you named. They're also, for me, foundational writers. Another Caribbean writer that is an inspiration for me is Louise Bennett, Miss Lou. Yes, for Miss Lou, yes.
Miss
So
Lou.
she is a Jamaican folklorist poet, and she did a lot of her poems were in Jamaican patois, and she's the first epigraph in the book, actually. And so it's important for me to keep the oral folkloric language of Jamaican culture and Jamaican patois alive, and I get a lot of my inspiration from Miss Lou. Yeah. And if you don't know Miss Lou, go and read her poetry.
So, Sophia, my college thesis was on JBC,
Yeah.
and Miss Lou was included.
Wow.
Little known fact.
Regarding Lucille Clifton, won't you celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed? And I'm sure you read that poem with your students, but every year it's such a transformational poem for me, and I hold it very dearly. So, and to your question about Maya Angelou, Maya Angelou preceded Toni Morrison, and Toni Morrison preceded Toni Cade Bambara, or at least was the editor for Toni Cade Bambara, so in some ways preceded her. And I am not bold enough to consider myself just yet a part of that lineage or legacy, but it is something that I ambition to, at least by the end of my life, be able to look back and say confidently that these women inspired me and that I come from them. So I keep Maya Angelou, very close to me in the same way that I do Toni Morrison. And also a huge fan of Edwidge Danticat, very important to me as another Caribbean writer. Okay, Mabule. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
Since the memoirs are so personal, have there been any repercussions since publishing them, whether positive or negative?
No, I tend to, like Sophia said, I spent a lot of time, I called my mother and I said, this is what I'm saying, and read her a couple of passages, and she said, this is your story, you do with it what you want. And I took that to heart. So, yeah, no one was mad at me, but except for my ex-boyfriend, but that was gonna happen.
Yeah, I feel lucky that no one is mad at me yet. I find that there's a lot more Jamaican people who are like, I know her. I'm like, I don't remember you. Do I know you?
It's so funny.
You wouldn't talk to me then.
Yes, a lot of my classmates from high school have come out the woodwork. So.
Thank you both.
Yes, sir.
When typically people talk about poets who write outside of the genre of poetry, it's usually about language. But can you talk a bit about the other elements of poetry that have informed you writing memoir?
That's a great question.
Yes, Jason.
The beloved Jason Reynolds.
Yes.
My personal hero. I spoke a little bit earlier about musicality.
Yeah.
It's not often that you come to a memoir and are able to locate the musicality of poetics, right? I would say, because I've heard this feedback too, we both get a lot of credit from people around how the book sounds, what it feels like when it's being read out loud, or even if you listen to it on Audible. And that feels like the most important part of moving within genre, is that sense of musicality actually travels throughout. And I also write nonfiction and do journalism and et cetera. My favorite is to write profiles. And my favorite thing ever is to try and find the rhythm of a person's life and then try to incorporate that into the way the profile works. So I would say all of that is informed by just growing up learning poetry.
Yeah, I think it's the same for me. I thought a lot about the musicality of it and the way that the words would sound, the rhythm of it, that I think a lot of people who write prose might not think so closely about. But
No
for
shade.
me, I was like, I wanted every sentence to really read that way. And I think a lot about, I talk about this a lot, but I think a lot about the Jamaican landscape as a direct and fertile mirror to how I want the sentences to sound and how I want the language to be constructed on the page. So that has to do with specificity of imagery, of specific themes and motifs that come back throughout the book in a sort of cyclical way, a circular way that is also tied to a lot of things in Jamaican culture, Jamaican folklore. I think a lot about the rhythm of the sea, and wanting the language when you read it, the sentences when you read it, to really bring you to Jamaica, to the sort of humid kiss of Jamaica, the sounds of the breeze in the trees, and the sound of the ocean, and the rhythms of the land itself is what I take as inspiration for how I approach the writing.
And also form too, right? Just the impulse to experiment and to be unconventional. So most of my memoir is in these prose blocks. And the intention is not simply because I like prose blocks, but that I wanted to create space on the page for the reader to have a place of rest, right? To know that they should pause in between each section, again, to sort of mitigate that transference of trauma that I was trying to limit.
So we are getting toward the end. There are 5 people in line, so I'm just going to just ask your question one by one, and then you guys can pick which ones you want to answer. But I hate to leave people wanting. So ask the question, 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 and then I'll keep track. Say, quickly.
So you both have talked about vulnerability and like harm to oneself, like the space you take to write something. What would you say, given like the personal essay industrial complex that we're seeing, what's that line between vulnerability and like maybe like catastrophization, self-harm?
Or like exploitation.
Okay,
Exactly the word I was looking for. Thank you.
thank you. Okay, I'm writing this down.
Okay.
This is really tall. First, I want to say thank you so much for you guys being here. It means the world personally to me. So I'm in a position where I'm coming from like writing a bunch of poetry to working on a book of just hybrid, but like mostly creative nonfiction. So I was just wondering, just like how do I describe this? So do you feel like anything that you write going forward that falls outside of poetry has a sort of influence, like anything that falls outside of that genre? And can you like go into like your reasonings why?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Also want to say thank you. It's been beautiful to listen to you all. So with a dominant narrative of Black women must be strong, I find your writing to be very revolutionary of like strength through vulnerability. And my question is like, how did you come to your comfort, like how did you become comfortable with sharing very vulnerable stories, especially knowing it would be consumed by more than just these people in the room, let alone, you know, a lot of people?
Thank you.
Similar question. To like write something vulnerable, you often have to reflect or share things that are kind of unsightly, either about your own life or the life of someone else. And if you had any fear or guilt of making visible those things that often people want to keep hidden.
Okay.
Hi, I have read Miss Sinclair's book. I haven't read Miss Felix's book. I'm sorry for that. But Miss Sinclair.
Okay, totally fine.
That's why we're here.
All right, but there were about 10 years between when you finished high school and when you were able to begin college. I'm wondering, how did that time feel for you, and how do you feel it shaped the person you have become?
It was 6.
6. It felt long.
But yeah, it felt long to me too.
You want to start
Sorry,
with that?
What was the second part of her question?
How did it feel going through it, and how has it shaped the person you've become?
Thank you.
Okay. We'll start there.
I mean, how did it feel going through it? It was, I don't know, it felt kind of bizarre. I didn't know at the time that it was abnormal. There were a lot of things that I realized were abnormal when I was writing the book, and my editor was like, hey, this is kind of not a normal thing. Can you address this? Because your reader will want to know. And I was like, oh, I guess it was abnormal to like not have any friends growing up and to spend most of your formative years in your house reading as many books as you could. So there was a time where I didn't really know I was living this strange kind of life until I left it. But I also, what it did was I wanted to make the most of what I had. And so I read voraciously, I wrote, and wrote my poems, and that sustained me. Yeah, without that, I don't know if I could have survived that period of time. Yeah.
Okay, so we had 2 questions about vulnerability.
Yeah.
So talk a bit about what it felt like to do that, to be so vulnerable and expressing what was going on. You've actually really talked about that already, but is there some expansion that you'd like to make on that?
I mean, it is very scary. For me, mostly I was afraid of exposing my reader to a kind of trauma that I couldn't justify why I was exposing them to that trauma. And you know, similar to the other question, I didn't want to exploit my readers or ask them again to do emotional labor that they hadn't signed up to do. So I spent a lot of time editing this book. I edited it about 10 times, or rewrote it 6 times, edited it 10 times. And all of that was to try and reconcile the amount of vulnerability with the work, right? With the material of the work. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, I've been emo since I was 10, right? So, like, I've always just, like, written it all. Everything that's happening to me, everything I'm feeling, I express it, I write it down. So, you know, coming to the memoir was never really afraid of that vulnerability or sort of sharing my pains and also the beauties of my life. I would say the thing that I spent the most time with when I was writing the book and through editing, the thing that I had a little fear about actually was the representation of Rastafari. Mm-hmm. Like for me, I wanted it to be very clear that how I grew up was particular to me. that I didn't want it to read as a blanket statement on all of Rastafari, right? So those passages, I would rewrite them and rewrite them. Like, I didn't want the main takeaway of Rastafari to be negative. So that was the thing that I took the most time with when I was writing about the history of Rastafari versus my own personal experience versus, you know, how the Rastafari movement began from this very great, you know, Black Africanist place of liberation. So really, that was the thing that I felt the most kind of trepidation about, that I wanted the reader to come away with a nuanced understanding of Rastafari, and one that was not negative.
And you have a resolution with your father by the end of the book. You talk about
Right, but my father doesn't represent all of Rastafari.
Right, no, and but you, I mean, I think you say it is very specific because what is in one household is not necessarily what is in another household.
Yeah, like even now I meet other people who grew up Rasta, and we kind of compare notes, and it's all different. They're like, oh, you grew up doing this, we didn't do that, or we had these rules, we didn't have that rule. So, you know, I very much wanted to make that clear in the book, that from household to household, it comes down to the Rasta brethren who is in the household of how they sort of interpret and make those rules. Yeah.
All right, so we have 1 minute, so I'm just going to hold up the book for you want to hold your book? Somebody's taking a photo.
It's Glory.
And there is a book signing, and I think I am supposed to be able to announce the location, and I do not know the location. So if there is a person who's on the staff who wants to come up to the microphone and tell us where the signing is, I would be grateful. Any closing words, any closing thoughts? By the way, they actually knew each other when we were doing the Zoom call. And I said, well, yeah, you guys met, and so that made me very happy.
Hi.
That's it. That's all I'll say.
That's it. Thanks to all of you.
Thank you.